As someone who loves My Little Ponies and dress-up dolls, I've been intrigued by the concept of a half-human, half-horse centaur doll whenever I see them, but of the modern mainstream doll brands, there's basically only one that's made any centaurs, and that's Monster High. Avia Trotter is Monster High's main centaur with an upper body that's the same as the other dolls, and then they also made a spin-off called Frightmares, which are, they're different, and they're just not really my thing. So I wasn't interested in any centaur doll until I was researching retro toy lines for my last video and found these 1986 Kenner Shimmer toys. I immediately loved them so much. They're all based off mermaids, but instead of fish, they also have the bodies of birds, butterfly, horse, and deer. There are also some unproduced seahorses, which are cool for reasons I'll get back to later. So I set out to sculpt a Kenner-inspired doll of my very own, and I decided to make it a Fantasia crossover. So the sculpting of the centaur will be based on the Kenner doll, and the appearance will be based on the centaurettes from Fantasia. These retro dolls aren't that uncommon, and you can find versions of them for about $20 on eBay if you wanted to just make a custom Fantasia centaurette. But I'm here on YouTube being a sculptor and artist anyways, and so I like sculpting, and that's what I'm gonna do. This doll is made of air dry clay, but as I mentioned in my last video, I have a cheaper kind right now, which is more frustrating to work with. It takes just like extra work to do small details and things like that. I'm keeping the articulation pretty simple, and in fact nearly non-existent with the sculpt, just like the original, which could turn its head side to side and then also turn its human torso separately from its horse half. To be honest, I didn't really consider the articulation or how I'd keep the pieces together when I started this project. I just kind of threw that down the line for my future self to figure out later. I did make a peg for the body to sit on so it could turn, and a round ball in the neck so the head could theoretically tilt like a ball joint, but I wasn't sure how I'd attach them together. I tried to replicate the profile of the face as best as I could, as I think the doll's head matches the Fantasia character's style really well. I do think the faces and proportions are a little odd though in the context of the dolls themselves. The dolls all came with little matching baby versions that were sculpted and didn't have the posability that the bigger ones had. But the face and bodies of the parent is very childlike too, at least to me. It's just weird, I guess, because nowadays I feel like they give dolls younger siblings, but a lot of places online call these the baby and mommy pairing centaurs. The biggest thing I consciously changed was the torso of the doll, because I didn't want to have sculpted flowers. The Fantasia centaurettes don't have, shirts. They just have a lot of flowers cheekily draped over their bodies, and they also don't have any nipples. So hopefully that'll be okay for YouTube. They did think it was child appropriate in 1940 at least. Although I guess I shouldn't say that because they also thought racism was appropriate in 1940, which is why 4 shots were redacted from Fantasia in the 1960s. Disney actually puts a warning about racism at the front of their oldest cartoons, but they still leave the parts in Fantasia out. No big loss. The thing I liked most about the Kenner Shimmers is the delicate feathering around its feet, but it was also the most difficult part of sculpting this doll. I tried 3 methods for making the feet: dry carving, wet carving, and simply adding tiny little blobs of clay. Just normal sculpting. I honestly thought carving would work better and be easier, but sculpting it like normal on a tiny scale was actually the easier method. For every few seconds of clips I show of me sculpting this, there are minutes and hours of footage, probably. One of the most annoying things about sculpting on such a small scale is how I'm constantly adding tiny sesame seed-sized pieces of clay. That's such a tongue twister. Or smoothing out pea-shaped flat blobs to shape everything. And it basically looks like I'm doing nothing most of the time on video. I'll carve and sand everything smooth, I'll need to go back and add more clay and then need to do it over again, but it's important to know when to go back over things and improve them and to not get too hung up on what I've already made. Time for a middle of the video, next video preview. I'm trying to maybe make this a regular thing so that I can show you upcoming stuff, and also I wanted to thank everyone for all the views and comments on the last video. First off, I think I'm going to call the ball-jointed Takara doll the big sister Takara. I've pretty much finished most of her sculpting except for the very bottom of the legs I'm still figuring out. I really want to finish the Big Sister Takara and make a video on it, but I wanted to get some experience 3D printing things because she's like, I think at least 20 pieces, and there are a lot of really small details and things like that that I wasn't sure would print correctly. Especially since I basically have no experience 3D printing and I don't have a 3D printer. Okay, so speaking of getting some 3D printing practice, I have another surprise for my next video. It's a sea pony. I made a Takara pony, sea pony with a ball-jointed seahorse tail. That's why I was excited about the seahorse doll, mermaid doll. I'm going to take you on the whole adventure of me printing it, and the issues I had, and the things I learned, and so on in the next video I do. She's literally in progress right now. I'm so excited about her. I wanted to get her done in Mermaid, but there were like some delays with the printing, because I had to get her printed at the library, and so I was going back and forth with the guy at the library for a little bit. I'm not actually sure if I'm more excited for the eventual Big Sister Takara or the Sea Pony, because I love the Sea Pony so much. I can't even imagine making a Takara that's better than her. Feel free to tell me which one you're looking forward to in the comments. Oh, and please like the video. I promise you, eventually I will make the Big Sister Takara, but it's gonna be like a super big project. Obviously I want to make her really good, and I'm still learning about 3D printing. And I don't own my own 3D printer, so it's hard to learn about 3D printing. So yeah, stay tuned for that. I sanded the centaurette as best I could, over and over. Finally got tired of it. I finally layered on a lot of thin layers of paint. The centaurettes have skin that's the same color as their horse half, but I realized after I had chosen her that the pink one has the most realistic skin tone. I didn't like that. I wanted to keep her fantasy tone, so I tried to keep the pink on the purpley side with a tad bit of blue, and also just very light. A detail I added off screen that you'll notice with the horse half is there's some fluff around her torso. I felt like it needed just a little bit more detail on that area, and it helps sort of wrap around the torso where it turns around and makes it look a little more seamless, or at least it gives the seam some detail. I wanted to keep the pearlized shimmer, from the original Kenner Shimmer dolls, and also the gradient feet on the horse half. But I started with laying down layers of normal acrylic and made that dark pink gradient. I only have metallic paints in metal colors like silver, white, gold, and bronze, but I thought that they were fairly transparent and I would just have to layer them on top of the pink paint. This turned out to not really be the case. I mixed bronze and white metallic to get a reddish sheen, but it was pretty opaque and kind of covered up all the pink. So I ended up putting more layers of white metallic paint mixed with a red mica powder, and I kind of had to redo all the gradients. The face paint was more heavily inspired by Fantasia, although the Kenner Shimmers have similarly simple eyes. Like a lot of dolls from the 1980s, their eyes are very round and then flat on the bottom and looking upwards. I do like big eyes on dolls, but there's something that really appeals to me about the retro dolls, maybe because so many dolls nowadays have really big eyes that it feels like a novelty to see dolls with small or more natural sized eyes, I guess. One of the reasons I didn't particularly like the Nightmare dolls from Monster High, in fact, is that their eyes are kind of rough in my opinion. A lot of them look like their eyes are going in opposite directions. I'll happily make my dolls look a bit cross-eyed as opposed to wide-eyed. In case you're wondering, the real main reason I don't like the Nightmares is their horse half has kind of bad horse anatomy, and they're stylized in a way I really don't love. Aviatrotter has a more detailed and realistic horse half, but it's also just kind of a bit boring, and I don't care for the goth aesthetic of it. If I were to customize an Aviatrotter doll, I think I'd want to re-sculpt the bottom of her feet a little bit more interesting, because I really do like having feathered feet on horses, and I think it makes them look really pretty. I took more artistic liberties with the cheeks and the lips and made her a little bit more smiley than the centaurettes. It was a really simple face, but because it was so small I had trouble getting footage of it. I did realize after I'd finished her that I should have just used chalk pastel to make blushing cheeks because I have spray-on sealant, but I ended up just using that at the very end after finishing all the painting to get her a matte surface, and then I even added gloss to her lips and eyes after that to give it more detail. The flower garland is really simple. The flowers are just fabric with a bit of glue so it won't fray, and I spent a very long time cutting them very small. The vine is just an embroidery thread with knots spaced out along it, and then I used a normal fine thread to sew the flowers and leaves and little beads on some of the flowers. I also put a bead in the middle of the vine with knots on either side, so you can sort of tighten or loosen the garland around her neck and make an X so that it kind of covers her, inappropriate bits. I don't know, she doesn't even have nipples, so it doesn't really matter. The flower crown was made of wire wrapped in embroidery thread and glue, and I was gonna somehow tie on the roses, but I had trouble with my initial plans, and I ended up just essentially gluing together a cinnamon roll of fabric and then adding a few petals to the outside to make roses. And then I used the leftover flowers to decorate the ends of the little flower crown. So her hair isn't that neat. It's a little messy. I honestly used my cat's hairbrush to brush out the yarn for these projects, but I couldn't find it, so I ended up using a series of other, less good brushes and hand untangling the yarn into straight lines. Also, I got this yarn for $1 at Goodwill. Yeah, this is my brokest doll. I used supplies that I already had other than the dollar yarn. That was to save up for my next project. You're probably wondering how this doll stays together, and the answer is, as mentioned at the beginning, I left that for later and she sort of doesn't. I put a bit of felt around the peg and the horse half, and it does stay on tight enough to sort of lift the entire thing, although I wouldn't risk holding it like that for very long. I made a makeshift peg for the head with a bit of wire and a piece of plastic from the bottle cap. All you really need is a piece of plastic flexible enough to bend that will spring back into shape inside the head, so it'll essentially hold the head on, but I can also pull it out if need be. The head's a little wobbly, but it works alright because it's made of air dry clay and is really light. Before the big reveal, I decided to do something a little extra between painting layers on this project. I made a 3D model of this doll, and it's available on my itch.io page. Obviously, the 3D model's a little different from my doll, and it's also not really made to be posable, but I did cut it into pieces to make it easier for people to print and then sort of assemble, because otherwise you need so many supports for this doll. I hope you like it, and if anybody prints it, let me know. And the big reveal. I hope you like her as much as I do. I'm really happy with her sculpting, especially on the horse part. I think keeping the face sculpt simple and focusing on the paint was a really good idea, and her face looks very complete to me, somewhat professional. Her flowers are just okay, but I think they get the message of a garland and flowers across without too much detail. So I'm happy with it. The parts I have the most issues with are the hands, which look kind of rough, and her hair, which has not been the easiest to try and style. It still looks a little bit puffy, but we'll just say that she's a little centaur that lives in the woods, and, they don't have conditioner in the woods, so her hair's a bit poofy. Or maybe she's just having it's very high humidity and she's having a frizzy hair day. Overall, I think she looks super cute, and I had a lot of fun working on this project and trying to revive this retro doll. I think it's so sad that they like didn't sell well enough. There are all these like unproduced prototypes that look so cute, like zebras and the seahorses that I mentioned, which obviously I'm very excited about, and all that stuff. And I just think it's so sad that we don't have like a cute doll line like that nowadays. Thank you for watching, for bearing with me. Like, comment, subscribe, etc. See you next time for another art project. I hope the audio turns out okay in this video. It's like super hot, so the AC is on in the distance, but it's also being drowned out by the sound of the thousands of cicadas outside my window shrieking in unison. Hopefully I can cut that all out without too much quality drop.